Welcome to the Cyber Center for Biblical Studies. Hi, my name is Herb Bateman. Today we want to discuss a book entitled Studies in the Pauline Epistles. This has been a book that has been edited by Matt Harmon, who teaches at Grace Theological Seminary here in northern Indiana. And he's here to introduce us to this book. Matt, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So tell me about this book. This book entitled Studies in the Pauline Epistles. Sounds pretty broad. What's going on in this book?
It is broad. It's really intended to be a snapshot into several current issues in the academy that are being discussed with respect to Paul's letters, his life, his theology. And so we have accumulated an outstanding all-star cast to try to shed some light on these issues. People who have read in the area of Pauline studies will certainly recognize names like D.A. Carson, James Dunn, N.T. Wright, Tom Schreiner, and Stephen Westerholm, among many other contributors who have weighed in and given us some insight into some kind of current issue in the study of the Pauline epistles, his life, his ministry, his theology, his background.
Okay. Can you give us a couple sample chapters that are in this book?
Sure. Well, the book is broken down into three main sections. The first section is on exegeting Paul, and so it's more of studies that are specifically oriented towards one particular passage and then drawing out implications for our understanding of Paul's life, ministry, theology, etc. So there's an essay in there by Ardell Canaday on Romans 5, and he draws out some helpful implications from the Adam-Christ typology that's going on there. The second section is on Paul's use of the Jesus tradition and Old Testament scripture. So there's a few essays in there on that subject. My essay falls in there. I try to explain when Paul in Galatians 4 says that these things are allegorical. When he uses that word, what does he mean by that, and how is he using that? And try to explain, is it allegory, is it typology, or is it something else? And then the third section is more on contemporary issues in Paul. And so this is where I think we have probably the most interesting combination of contributions, because we have James Dunn, who's a well-known advocate of the new perspective on Paul, writing an essay entitled, What's Right About the Old Perspective on Paul? So he's looking at a view he doesn't hold, but saying this is what's really good and strong about it. Then we have a contrasting essay by Stephen Westerholm, a well-known advocate of the old perspective on Paul, talking about what's right about the new perspective. And so that exchange, that interaction, we think is a very unique aspect of the book, to have advocates of positions talking about what's really good and helpful about positions they don't hold. And the result is, I think, some interesting insights into that very entrenched discussion between traditional or old perspective readings of Paul and new perspective on Paul readings that I think is insightful. And anytime you have an essay by N.T. Wright, of course, that's always a great blessing to have in there. And so he has an essay on Kazamon and his apocalyptic reading, and is it really opposed to a more sort of salvation historical approach to reading Paul? So this is really an opportunity for people to get a good snapshot of some of the current discussions in the area of Pauline studies.
Very good. Well, what spurred you on to write this? What was the catalyst that caused you to approach these authors to come and make this collection of essays possible?
Well, the subtitle helps explain that, Essays in Honor of Douglas Moo. Many of our viewers are probably familiar with Doug Moo and his commentaries in particular. He's made a number of contributions to Pauline studies. He's written commentaries on Romans and Galatians that are benchmark kind of commentaries. And he's also written commentary on Colossians and Philemon, and even wandered outside the Pauline corpus to write a couple of outstanding commentaries on James as well. And he it was someone that I had the privilege of studying under at Wheaton College for my PhD. And so myself and the other editor, Jay Smith, we decided that we wanted to honor him with a festschrift. And a festschrift is simply a collection of essays written by former students and colleagues in the academy in celebration of a scholar's contributions to the academy. And so we got together and tried to assemble this sort of dream team of contributors. And one of the most interesting things about doing this was getting to see the response of these, very well-known, high-profile scholars eager to write in honor of Doug and his contributions, and the excitement that they expressed to be able to show their appreciation for Doug, even when they disagreed with him. And so that's one of the things that stands out to me about Doug Moo, is the fact that even scholars who don't see things the same way as he does have a great respect for him and the way that he approaches the text and the way that he interacts with other scholars. And so this is an opportunity for us to say we appreciate the contributions that Doug has made to the academy and to the church through his writing and preaching.
Very good. Well, in some ways, you already answered this question when you talked about Dunn describing a view that he didn't hold. That strikes me as something that is pretty insightful. What might you say is something else that I might expect as a reader that might be insightful to anticipate?
Sure. Well, one of the interesting chapters in there is a chapter on how Paul used the Jesus tradition. So there's been a lot of discussion in academic circles as how familiar was Paul with any of the sort of sayings or stories about the life and ministry of Jesus. And the contribution by Craig Blomberg, I think, does a nice job of drawing out some of those maybe echoes and even allusions that you might read past too quickly and not realize that probably depends on Paul being familiar with some of the sayings and events in the life and ministry of Jesus. And so that is one of the more unique contributions in there that I think can actually kind of give you an awareness as you yourself are reading through Paul's letters to obviously kind of have that on your radar of, okay, so maybe Paul was familiar with this particular saying or story of Jesus. Because oftentimes I think in the academy there's been this sort of sharp, well, Paul really wasn't interested or didn't know about the sort of historical Jesus. And I think Blomberg does a nice job of showing that there's good reason to think he was familiar with different traditions and sayings.
In a book like this, where you got a collection of essays dealing with a broad topic like Pauline studies, I would suspect there were a couple of chapters you would have liked to have included, but time restraints and page limitations may have prohibited you.
Sure.
What one or two chapters do you wish you could have included?
Well, I think with a project like this, the way that we felt that tension was with trying to narrow down who would contribute. Because we started with a list of probably 25 or 30 people that we wanted to consider inviting. And in consultation with Doug's wife, actually, Jenny, we started narrowing the list down. And the hardest part was getting down to here are the 15 that we're gonna have. And that there were some hard choices in there. And I won't name him, but there was one scholar in particular who, after he found out about the project, emailed us asking if he could contribute something, and we had to write the very sad email back saying, "I'm sorry, the publisher has capped it at this, and we would have loved to have you contribute, and we certainly strongly considered having you contribute and inviting you, but at the end of the day, we had to make difficult decisions." And so the scholar took it pretty well, but that's where we really felt that tension of, we could have easily, if space were not an issue in the book, could have easily had another 10 scholars contribute chapters and not had a difficult time getting them to do it.
Mm-hmm. So, this is probably a book suited for an academy type of audience. How might this be helpful for a pastor? What are some nuggets in this project that might spur a pastor to want to read this?
Sure. I think that a pastor could dip in and read some of the individual chapters. This is the kind of book that the reader should not feel the obligation of, I have to read the whole thing. With a project like this, inevitably you're going to dip in and say, this chapter on this particular passage or topic is most interesting to me. But I do think that when a pastor is just trying to get a sense of what's going on in the Pauline studies sort of world, dipping into the selected essays in this book could be helpful. So just to give an example, when you're using a commentary on Paul's letter to the Romans or to the Galatians, and you see discussions about the new perspective or the old perspective or the Lutheran tradition or whatever it might be, so oftentimes, because those discussions have been going on for a while, authors don't explain, what does that involve? What does the new perspective involve? What does the old perspective involve? So that dipping into a book like this, where you see advocates of a position describing what's good about the opposing position, can give them a richer sense of what are the issues at stake in this discussion and how do they affect the exegesis of specific passages, as well as the larger structures of Pauline theology. And there are individual essays on just focused passages in Paul. So Grant Osborne, for example, looks at the citation of Psalm 68 in Ephesians 4. Mm. So if a pastor was preaching through Ephesians and he gets to that chapter, that section where Paul quotes from Psalm 68, there's some very interesting things going on there. He could dip in and see how Grant Osborne surveys the issue, explains what he used to think, and now explains why he doesn't think that anymore, why he's changed his mind as a result of work in the text and looking at the Old Testament context and even interacting with some of the Second Temple sources that are out there. So there are those kind of essays that could be helpful in a pastor coming to that passage in his preaching series on a particular book and saying, I want to go a little bit deeper on that and see what insight there might be for that.
Very good. Well, Matt, thank you so much. Appreciate you coming and sharing this work. And thank you for joining us. And I trust that this might be something that might interest you, pique your interest to pick up. Like Matt shared, at times we read a commentary and they're talking about things that are happening in the academy, and we don't always pick up the nuanced ways in which things are being discussed, but a book like this could help us out. In the meantime, I trust you will have a great day and that you will walk with the King and be a blessing. Thank you.